All right. There are those who will be joining us later asynchronously. So welcome to you and welcome to everybody who's here live. Thank you for being here. Today's subject is diversity, Jewish diversity. And so we're going to learn about all different kinds of Jews. We break down in the modern denominations of Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, and some more. And we'll also learn about different cultures of Judaism, right? There are Jews all around the world who speak different languages, who listen to different music. And so we'll get just a taste of Jewish diversity and then discuss, why is it important for Jews to be pluralistic and diverse? It's part of our Jewish nature to be diverse. All the way back to the 12 tribes, right, of Israel, which all had their different languages and cultures and nuances and customs of how to be Jewish. All right, so let's get right into it. I'll start sharing my screen. Here's our PowerPoint with all kinds of Jewish faces, right? And and so look around the faces. Right. And if you ask yourself, like, what does a Jew look like? It's kind of hard to define, right? Because we have all kinds of Jews, all kinds of faces, all kinds of colors, all kinds of languages and clothing. And we're all Jewish, right? That's the point. And so let's listen to a couple of video clips. This is a video clip called The Hebrew Mamita. And there's some language in here and it's fairly controversial, but I guess that's the point. And so stop sharing for a moment and share a different screen. All right, so to contextualize this just for a moment, this is going to be, it's a hip hop, sort of spoken word poetry slam. And so here we go.
In New York City, please give it up for Vanessa.
So we've got all kinds of Jews, and this is one of them.
I meet a guy in a bar that's cute. He wears LL Bean duck boots and guards my bar stool when I have to go pee. He asked me out to dinner for the following Tuesday. I decline. Tuesday's Yom Kippur. I will be fasting. You're Jewish? Wow. You don't look Jewish. You don't act Jewish. And he says it in this tone that sounds like he's complimenting me. And I say nothing. I say nothing, which combined with a flirty smile translates to thank you. I say nothing because I got a contact high up someone's anti-Semitic crack pipe. I say nothing because somewhere along my life's graph, I've been swayed to believe that being Jewish is not too cool, not too sexy. I say nothing because I'm in a deep sleep, a snow-white coma, destined to meet my prince 5 years later in the form of stone in Jerusalem named the Wailing Wall. I place folded paper with written prayers for the dead in a nook in the wall next to a woman with concentration camp numbers tattooed on her forearm. Surrounded by fervent praying and bodies swaying, I am far more awake than I ever thought possible. I suddenly remember the exodus of the Israelites, and I walk barefoot from the wall in the desert to the bar and look for the guy with the duck boots. He's not there, but I have something to say to him. He's not there, so I make a soapbox and reenact the scene. Bartender, tell me I don't look Jewish. Tell me I don't act Jewish. Because I'm saying.
All right, goes on from there.
Of seeing in person. And if you must see me as that blood-sucking Jew, just one heart tonight. I'm the Hebrew. Mamita, long lost daughter of Abraham and Sarah, the sexy oy veying, chutzpah having, non-cheaping, non-conspiracizing, always questioning, hip-hop listening, Torah scroll reading, all people loving, pride-filled Jewish girl, bigging up all people who are a little miffed because someone tells you you don't look like or act like your people. Impossible, because you are your people. You just tell them they don't look, period.
Yeah, so there you go. She nails the poetry slam, and uproarious clapping. Why? So why is that so important? Because there we go. Why is that so important? Because there is no one way to perceive what a Jew is. Right? We look different. We talk different. We have different denominations. We have different languages and cultures. Right? And so there's an exercise that we sometimes do when we're live, which is draw a picture of a Jew, right? And many times people will draw a picture of an Orthodox Jew, with peyot and a hat, right? And so that's sort of our stereotypical Jew, right? It comes from Eastern Europe and made their way through the Holocaust, but that's in some way insulting, right, to other Jewish journeys that exist. And so it's important to remember that we are connected across the globe with people who are very different than us, yet still very Jewish. All right, so that was the Hebrew mamita. So what are some of the distinct features that define what a culture is, right? So our religion is Jewish, but we have so many different cultures that make up what a Jew is. So some of the differences that we have involve food, right? We eat very different food. For example, right in Israel, we have Israeli food, falafel and shawarma. Here in America, we have gefilte fish and chicken soup. Right, it's just all over the board. Different ways that we name our children, different languages that we speak, different customs and Passover. Like there's an Israeli custom, I think, comes from some Mizrahi land, where they take, they reenact the slavery of Egypt. And they take leeks, I think, and kind of whip each other, on the back. So right, there are some strange and wonderful customs, each to their own distinct geography and culture. Dress, right? We dress differently. We listen to different music, and we have different kinds of dances. Right here in America, we had dance the hora, but in other places there, different kinds of dances. Particularly Yemenite dances are very beautiful, and right all across the board. So let's listen to a little bit of diverse Jewish music. And if this works, it'll be some sort of technological miracle. All right, you can see that so far. All right, so the first clip is an Ashkenazi clip. All right, we're going to learn about the different cultures in a moment. Ashkenazi comes from Eastern Europe. I happen to be, I did a 23andMe genetic test. I happen to be like 96% Ashkenazi, which means come from Eastern Europe. And we made our way to America. This is sort of what Ashkenazi music sounds like. All right, so that's Ashkenazi music. It's in a minor key and it's bouncy. It's in 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's pretty easy to count. Fairly simple to sing. And it's simple because we want the community to be singing with us, right? If it's one thing to be singing alone, Sometimes we like that, like on the high holidays, the Chazan sings Kol Nidre and sings some beautiful prayers, and we are lifted through the song of our representative. But other times, and we're closer to my heart, there's community singing, which means that we all are breathing and singing as one. And so that's important to me to have that participation. And also that's a characteristic of Ashkenazi music, is that we all sing it together. So here's some Jews from Ethiopia singing. Beautiful. All right, so those are it's Jewish music from Ethiopia, and you can see the words from east to west. We all bow down to Jerusalem. And so no matter where we are across the globe, we are one people with one heart, and that's sometimes pretty hard to make happen, to activate, especially like when we go to Israel, for example. I've taken many pilgrimages to Israel along with people who are there for the first time, for example. And it's a different language, it's a different dress, it's different food, right? And what I tell them is, right, we end up, watching as spectators, we don't really feel a part of it, right? And it's just so important. Part of the mission of the trip is to have people feel like we're connected, right? And sometimes it's hard because our languages and dress and attitudes are so different. But it's so important to remember, and one of the major points of this lesson is we are Am Echad Im Lev Echad, one people with one heart, no matter where we come from. So here's some Mizrahi music. Mizrahi music is sort of Arab, Israeli, right, Middle Eastern music that's popular in Israel. All right, so that's Mizrahi music, right? So the Ethiopian music, you heard a lot of drums and bongos, right, which is typical of Ethiopian music. And this Mizrahi music, right, this Middle Eastern music, that lead guitar instrument, right, is called an oud, which we share with the Arab cultures. And it's a beautiful stringed instrument, and it has a very distinctive sound, right? That's not found in Ashkenazi music, nor in Ethiopian music, right? The other kind of music of note is Ladino music, right? We have a couple of Ladino Hanukkah songs, right, that I sing, and they sort of uno candelicas, dos candelicas, tres candelicas, right? And it's a Ladino Hanukkah song that we find it's important because it connects us with the different cultures of Judaism, right? And you have Jewish ethnicities. Again, we're one religion, one people with different ethnicities. So we heard about some Ashkenazi music, right? And that's a sort of Eastern European. Sephardi, right? Comes originally from Spain, but now there are a lot of Sephardi Jews in Eretz Israel and beyond. We have a nice Sephardi community here in Houston. And it's very different. It's a different way of praying, a different way of singing and dancing. Yet again, we are still one people. Sub-Saharan Africa, India, and China have vibrant Jewish communities and speak that language, right? And it's sometimes hard to communicate unless you're good on your Hebrew, in which we all pray in the same language, and so that's sometimes a way for us to connect with ethnicities and cultures that are different than ours, right? We have our Jewish languages. Ashkenazi is in Yiddish, Vus macht du Yid, right? And it's a mixture of German and Hebrew and kind of a mix, right? Older generations spoke a lot of Yiddish. There's actually a Yiddish revolution. They're trying to bring back Yiddish speaking. And in many Jewish households that came from Eastern Europe, Yiddish was called Jewish, and it's called the Jewish language, right? Because that what was spoken in Eastern Europe. And a lot of times the grandparents were able to tell secrets and have secret conversations in Yiddish because the American generation, right, never learned Yiddish. So, I know a few phrases, but most of us don't know Yiddish anymore. And so Ladino, as I explained, is a cross between Spanish and also Hebrew. We have Hebrew, right, which is our language of our Bible and language of our prayer system. But in Israel, there was a miracle happened, and a man named Echad Ha'am reinvented Judaism as a contemporary language. And so every year, there's still a Hebrew Institute that creates new words and adds them to the dictionary. It happens here in America too, but more so in Israel, right? They tend to add more and more words every year because of the technology, because of contemporary life, adds more and more concepts, right? Amharic and Judeo-Farsi and Judeo-Arabic. There's one interesting thing about Judeo-Arabic is there's a right, as we know, there's Arab-Jewish conflict that goes on. However, many Jews grew up in Arab countries, right? And so, especially, and they emigrated to Israel, but they still have all the culture and ethnicity of the Arabic world. They speak Arabic at home, they eat Arabic food, right? And how interesting that is that we have this crossover. There's a Venn diagram, right? In the middle, there's Israeli Arabs, or Arab Israelis, right? That grew up with in an Arabic culture, right? There's a TV show called Fauda, which is a little bit violent, but about the Arab-Israeli conflict. And we see that the Israeli who speak Arabic and grew up Arabic sometimes go undercover, right, into Arab nations. So it's easy to do so because they're actually Arab. And so what an interesting and strange phenomenon in Judaism, that we have Jews everywhere that speak different languages and have different cultures, right? And so we move from Jewish languages and Jewish cultures and Jewish music into contemporary American denominations, right? So in other parts of the world, right, they don't break down like Jews in America. So this is an American phenomenon that we'll explain. And we break down into three major categories: Orthodox, Conservative, and Reform. But we'll also learn about some other branches of denominations. Unlike most other religions and religious denominations, Jewish denominational diversity is almost entirely defined by observance rather than theology. right? In Catholicism and Christianity, Baptists, right? It all depends on how you perceive Jesus. Was he a man? Was he a God? Was he a God man? God's representative, right? And it's all about theology, what we think about our religion. However, in Judaism, it really breaks down over observance, over the things that we do, over behavior, our relationship with something called halacha, Jewish law, that we'll learn about in just a moment. So contemporary Jewish denominations, right? So it wasn't always this way. This is a fairly new phenomenon in the history of Judaism, right? So it's like a little fingernail of the body of Judaism. Just recently started in the 1800s, right? And so the Enlightenment hits the European world, and the intellectual movement of the Enlightenment, right, brings us out of the Dark Ages into intellectual enlightenment, right? And these are folks like John Locke and Isaac Newton and Voltaire, right? If you remember before, men of science, and there are usually men in our patriarchal society, which has changed, thank God. But the men of science were like Galileo, right? Was locked up by the church because he was bringing new innovations, right, about science. And so part of the Dark Ages is nothing new, right, should happen. It's consistent, it doesn't change, it's constant, and the Enlightenment changes all that. Right? And it's a new phenomenon that accepts knowledge and new learning and new ideas. It's open, it's investigation is the important thing, and religious tolerance, right, becomes possible in the Enlightenment. It's the age of reason, nature, and humanity, right? Everything gets questioned and investigated with reason, right? So no longer are we just relying on what is. What we're talking about is learning new things scientifically, religiously, historically. Scholarship, right, becomes really, really important, right? And so the Enlightenment causes a rift in Jewish life. And so here are the choices, right? You can embrace the Enlightenment, right, and move along with that evolution. You can reject the Enlightenment and stay in your isolated, closed environment. Is there a positive way to put that? In your, I guess, in your neighborhoods and culture, and or you can try to balance the two, Enlightenment and tradition, right? The new and the old, right? Somehow balance those two things, right? And so when we talk about Jewish behavior, one of the words that comes up, one of the concepts that comes up is halacha. And so it's an important word in Judaism. And it's a noun, and it means Jewish law. So when we say the word halacha, it means Jewish law, right? Are you halachically, that's the adverb, are you adjective, are you halachically observant, right? Do you observe halacha or not, right? In what way do you observe halacha? Okay, and so one important thing to me as a conservative Jew, I'll try to be fair in this class and try to present each denomination as, fairly as possible. But it's hard for me because I have my perspective as a conservative Jew that's near and dear to my heart. But I'll give it a shot, and then maybe I'll tell you when I'm being biased and when I'm being more fair. So Jewish, it means Jewish law, but behind it, it means the path. Halacha, lalechet, means to walk. Right? And it means to walk the path, right? To walk the righteous path, right? And for me, what that means is, right, you're moving, it's not static, right? A path is something that evolves, and you don't know what's going to happen around the corner, right? So for me, that's an important value as a conservative rabbi and a conservative Jew, is that it's an evolving path. We keep walking it, right? And sometimes we go astray and we can come back to the path, right? But this is our well-worn path of Jewish law and Jewish observance, right? Lighting Shabbat candles, keeping kosher, keeping Shabbat. All these are in the framework of of halacha, Jewish law, the Jewish path. All right, so here are our three major, big three Jewish denominations. And so we'll stay here for a couple minutes. So we see here, it goes from left to right. I think that's true on your screen too. Right. And so it also has that spectrum, right, of progressive to conservative, right? One of the tricky parts is there's two ways I'll be using conservative today. One of them is like politically conservative, right? That change, averse to change, right? Looking backwards, trying to conserve the past. So that's the small c. All right, and a big C, and it's not a good name for the movement, but the capital C, conservative, right? It's a little misleading, but I'll tell you why that happened. But there are some people that want to change the name of conservative Judaism, and I'll explain that in a moment, to covenantal Judaism, right? It still retains the C, which they like, but it's a more accurate description of who we are and what we think and do. So on the left, right, is the first denomination that came out of the Enlightenment, started in Germany. We'll talk a little bit more about it in a moment. Just want to give you an overview before we go into details. And their relationship to halacha is that halacha is a guideline. It's an important value, but it's not legally binding. It's not law. In other words, the Reform rabbis and Reform scholars wrote halacha has a vote, but not a veto, right? Halacha is important, you know, but it's not necessarily binding on what we do. We have other values that are more important than halacha, namely loving kindness, social action, community, prayer, right? All these things are more important than halacha, right? And then we swing to the right, which is actually historically accurate. Right? First, the Reform movement came out of the Enlightenment, and then the pendulum swung this way. The pendulum swung to the right as a reaction to this newfangled revolutionary Reform movement, the Orthodox movement, which believes that the halacha is eternally binding. We made a promise with God at Mount Sinai, and ever since then, we are bound to keep halacha, right, which is a foundation of orthodoxy. Right? We keep the law and we don't change the law. Right? The people who came before us were more connected with Mount Sinai. And the further we go, this is according to orthodoxy, the further we go along in history, the less and less connected we are with the original source. And so we look backwards to figure out what the rabbis meant over the years, to figure out how Moses and God want us to live. Right? We don't look to the present. We don't look to, right, certainly not Enlightenment. We just look backwards at our founding fathers and our sages of great that created the laws, defined the laws, and that's what orthodoxy believes. The name Orthodox, right? So orthopedist, orthodontist, ortho, right? It means correct. You correct your teeth, you correct your bones. It means the correct doctrine, right? And so I don't want to criticize it too much, but it has a hard time being pluralistic because it claims to be the only correct doctrine. Rabbis came to America and they saw the Reform movement on the left and the Orthodox movement on the right, and the conservative movement was born to be in the middle. And so as you can see, it's fairly problematic because we're a centrist movement. And the motto of our movement is tradition and change. So we have to keep all of our traditions of the past and respect and honor halacha. However, we also have to change with the times. Right? Early conservative, the JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary, is the original hub of the conservative movement. And actually, at the beginning, it was called JTSA, the Jewish Theological Seminary of America. And so it educated all the American rabbis who wanted to start updating Judaism. One example is all the sermons were offered in Yiddish, right? And if you didn't speak Yiddish, you're out of luck. And so at JTS, right, they were training rabbis to be contemporary for the times, right, and speak English, from the pulpit. And that was a revolution at the time. The other thing the conservative movement did was that the rabbis have to be contemporary and relevant. So, and the the saying was, right, the rabbis got to know baseball so that he can relate to the congregation. Right, baseball is the American pastime, the American sport, hot dogs and apple pie. And so the conservative movement said you have to be American. You have to know American culture. You have to know where your people are at in order to be a good rabbi. But it's tough to be in the middle, a centrist. We believe in tradition and change. Okay? And so a little bit of the history here. Right, they were in reaction to the Enlightenment, emancipation, which began in Europe and then came to America in the late 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century. When the Jewish community was segregated from Western culture, Jews didn't have the option of adopting these secular lifestyles or values. But when the ghetto walls were lowered, sometimes metaphorically and sometimes literally, this became a major shift in how Jews were forced to confront their identities. As I mentioned before, Reform Judaism came first in Germany as the first modern denomination and is rooted in the values that were forbidden, right, by Jews to dress like civilized Germans. And Reform Judaism adopted the practices of Protestant Christianity, right? So they started off really radical, right? Today, they softened their stance quite a bit, but in the beginning, all the services were in English, right? There was no Hebrew used, right? In order so they could blend in to the German churches. They had organ music, right? And they dressed for the first time, and they dropped all the practices that emphasized the difference between Jews and non-Jews, right? So part of the purpose of kashrut is so that we stay within our own neighborhoods, right? We're forbidden to eat outside food. And so that creates a barrier, right, between Jews and the outside world. And the Reform movement wanted to lower those barriers. And so, they dismissed all these laws of kashrut, and they started dressing like the other Germans around them, and they wore gowns, right, for services in order to achieve just a greater integration. Orthodoxy comes as a response to this perceived excess of the Reformed Jews, right? And so there's the Chatam Sofer, who lived in 1839, wrote, "Anything new is forbidden by the Torah. Nothing new is good," right? We have to stick with what we know. We have to look to the past in order to define who we are. Conservative Judaism then came as the third major denomination, and it tried to moderate these two polar opposites and find a place as centrist in the middle. After that, Reconstructionist Judaism was developed in the 1920s by Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan, and there he is. And his, calling card that Judaism is a civilization, not a religion. It's more than a religion. It's more than a faith. It's about peoplehood. It's about the people of Israel, right? And he also had more open and progressive theology. And then he said, God is the force that makes possible salvation. Right? God is all that energy in the universe and in our souls that moves us along our path, reaching towards salvation. right? And he was a bit of a naturalist, and he rejected the idea of the chosen people, which became problematic for progressive Jews, right? Who, the idea of chosenness is, we're better than everybody else. And he rejected that. He said, no, all religions have something to say. All religions are important and acceptable, right? And we are not the chosen people. We're one of many. And so the brachot over the Torah, when we receive an aliyah, it says, Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. Right? Thank you, God, for choosing us from among all the nations. And Reconstructionist Judaism changed that wording and says, Asher bachar banu im kol ha'amim. Thank you, God, for choosing us along with all the other nations. Right? It's a little word that changes, but the meaning shifts dramatically. That's right. The first one is the traditional way of saying it is, thank you, God, for choosing us from among all the other nations. And the Reconstructionist movement tweaks it to say, thank you, God, for choosing us and choosing all the other nations to be close to you. Right. So we, our special relationship with God is through the Torah. Right. That's who we are. We developed the Torah, we were given the Torah, we embrace the Torah as our connection with God, right? And Christians have Jesus, Buddhists have Allah and Muhammad. Everybody has their own, and meditation. And so everyone has their own special relationship with God. So that comes out of the Reconstructionist movement. And one other thing that he did is he founded the Jewish Center. Right. So the synagogues were not only a house of prayer, they became a center for Judaism. And so there are still some conservative synagogues around in New Jersey and other places, right, that are a center, right, and in the title of their names. And what that means is not only are we a faith, not only are we a people, a house of worship, but we're a center for our people. So our ethnicity matters, right? And our culture matters. And all this is Jewish and needs to be celebrated, not only our faith. And then we have an interesting movement called Renewal Judaism. They're gaining more traction over the years. They started with Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi. And you can see him here, in love with the Dalai Lama. And right, as they connect in a deep, deep way, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, right, and Renewal Judaism, right, use chants and meditation and all kinds of Eastern tools in order to reach our souls. Right, they're also known. I went to my first Renewal conference back in rabbinical school. A lot of breathing. Right, mindfulness, right, just a lot of Buddhist concepts get in there. However, as you can see, you can tell, but they still embrace all of the rituals, all of the outer garb and feeling of Orthodox Judaism, right? So they still daven, is what they call it, instead of pray. They still. Here's one of his books. Schachter Shalom says davening, so he uses the Yiddish word for prayer, right? And a guide to meaningful Jewish prayer, right? And what he wanted to do is take all the best of all the denominations and put them into one beautiful spiritual practice, right? So you say, you're right, the Orthodoxy has gone rote and ritual and become somewhat fossilized, right? And he said, well, right, but they have beautiful songs and they have beautiful kapata and strimal, the garb that they wear works. You put yourself in surrounded by Jewish clothes, you feel Jewish, right? And so he took all the form of Orthodox Judaism and all the spirituality of Reform Judaism, all of the social action, dedication, all of the contemporary aspects of the Reconstructionist movement, appreciating, as you can see, all the different religions of the world and put them into renewal Judaism, where East meets West, where they are committed to spiritual research and development. And so it's a very interesting movement that I've been tracking and relate to, because I grew up in an Orthodox community and an Orthodox family, and then dabbled in Reform Judaism, right? So let's talk a little bit about contemporary Reform Judaism. Reform Judaism started out as high church, organs, very formal, tuxedos and top hats, right? And over the years, right, they've grown quite a bit, but now they're the largest. Right, they beat conservative. Conservative Judaism used to be the largest denomination, percentage-wise, in America. Now the Reform movement is doing much better in terms of population than the conservative movement, and they become much more accessible, right? Less highbrow and much more tender and informal. They keep some of the formality, but and they've started adding back some of the rituals that they took away from the beginning. They become less extreme in their rejection of Jewish ritual. And so there's a semblance, Shabbat is a holy day instead of, right? The Reform movement originally canceled Shabbat and went with Sunday, right? And so Shabbat is back, Kippot and Talitot are back. So it's been a really interesting evolution. Hebrew language is back. And one of the reasons they do so well is the Reform camping system. It was influenced by an amazing woman called Debbie Friedman, who brought music and song, contemporary music and song, and Hebrew singing along with the English, right? She wrote the Mishaberach prayer, which is a mix of Hebrew and English, which everybody uses now in conservative and Reform synagogues. May the one who, right? And so there's English and Hebrew. And so they've come a long way back to kind of a centrist approach, which is probably why they're doing well, right? Instead of being at the end of the spectrum, they've come much closer. And what's the future of Jewish denominations? Who knows? But it's been hard for conservative Judaism to hold the center, right? It's hard to be in the middle, right? Because you have to do tradition and change at the same time, which is really hard. And so some of the conservative movement is splitting, right? So our camping movement is Camp Ramah, and a lot of the Camp Ramah folks gravitate Orthodox, right? And so we've had, in my synagogue too, over the years, we've had a number of people go Orthodox because they feel like there's not enough. They want more. They want more Shabbat. They want Shabbat dinners and Shabbat lunches with friends and family, and they want to move to the Jewish neighborhoods and walk to synagogue. And so conservative movement has lost people to the right because of the commitment to tradition, and we've lost people to the left because the Reform movement has come closer to the conservative movement and closer to tradition. So it's kind of a tough spot to be in as a conservative Jew. However, I'm deeply committed to the theology, philosophy, membership of the conservative movement. I am a centrist, sort of in politics and in my life. I try to achieve a middle ground, a balance. And the other important thing about conservative Judaism, right, which should be renamed, centrist Judaism or covenantal Judaism. Here's why covenantal Judaism is a good idea, because part of our foundation is that halacha isn't stagnant. Right? According to the Orthodox movement, in like the 1600s, 1700s, with the codes of Jewish law, they stopped innovating, right? And they can no longer, react to the times. So, for example, right, gay and lesbian marriages, right? The Reform movement adopted that a while ago. The conservative movement more recently said it's permitted and celebrated, but the Orthodox community still hasn't, right? And there are wonderful people in the Orthodox community and wonderful rabbis. And when I sometimes confront Orthodox rabbis, say like, why, what's the deal? Why can't, and they say, well, we love, gay and lesbian folks. We welcome them into the community, but our hands are tied. It just can't do it, right? Because it hasn't been done before. There's no basis for it, according to them, in the Torah or in the codes, and our hands are tied. Right? And I don't accept that, right? If it's the right thing to do, then we should do it. We should figure out how to evolve Judaism. And so in the conservative movement, that's what separates Orthodoxy and the conservative movement. We both have a commitment to halakha, to Jewish law. However, the Orthodox community doesn't change. Of course, they change a little bit, right? And so they've done a better job of integrating women into Orthodox Judaism. But I don't think women rabbis will never get full status, right? It'll be a long time before that happens. But they're beginning to integrate women into communal roles, communal leadership roles. On the other hand, the conservative movement is committed to halakha as well, but our perspective of halakha is that it's a journey, that it's a path, right? And we have what's called a Committee of Jewish Law and Standards. And what they do is they meet 3 times a year in New York at JTS, and they make decisions about contemporary issues, GMO, laboratory meat, right? Is that fleishik or not or parv? How do we handle, the contemporary issues that we're faced with? They make decisions, they vote, they make decisions, and we move forward and we evolve. Right? And so the different denominations break down over different things, right? So their approach to Jewish law and practice, which we've talked about, their approach to LGBTQ issues, and really the definition of who is a Jew is a big deal, right? The Reform movement defines it as anyone who is born to either a Jewish mother or a Jewish father, or converts to Judaism. Right? So that's a Jew, right? So either their maternal descent or their patrilineal descent, right? And right in the Orthodox community, a Jew is defined by someone who was born to a Jewish mother, right? Not father. Right? If only the father is Jewish, then the person is not Jewish. Or someone who went through the conversion process only under Orthodox supervision, right? So if someone converts Reform or conservative, the Orthodox community will not consider them Jewish. And the conservative movement is a Jew who was born to a Jewish mother or who went through a conversion process. And for me, different conservative rabbis have different opinions, but for me, as a pluralist, that we'll get into in just a moment, I believe that if a non-Jew went through a conversion process in any denomination, then I consider them Jewish, even if it's more progressive than mine, Reconstructionist, renewal, or Reform. They come to the synagogue and are sometimes surprised that a conservative rabbi will accept their conversion, but I do so with a full heart. Good. And so let's move on to pluralism, right? What it means to be in a people that has different perspectives, right? And different ways of doing things. And so here's our traditional text, right? And so we have Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, the house of Shammai and the house of Hillel. Hillel and Shammai were 2 sages who disagreed about almost everything, right? Beit Shammai says yes, and Beit Hillel says no, right? And Hillel says it's okay, and they say it's not okay. And they disagree for a lot of things. For 3 years, Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel disagreed. These said, the halakha is in accordance with our opinion. And these said, the halakha is in accordance with our opinion. Right? So we've always had a different, diverse perspective in Judaism, all the way back to the 12 tribes, and then right? The Essenes and Pharisees and Zealots in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in time of the Holy Temple. And then we had Hasidim and Litvak, right? In Eastern Europe, we've always had different kinds of Judaism. And here's one, but that disagree fervently all the time, right? And so ultimately what happens, a divine voice emerged, right? In the Talmud, miracles, supernatural miracles like this sometimes happen. And a divine voice came into the house of study and said, Elu ve'elu, both these and those are the words of the living God. If you ask God who's right, God would say, both. They're both right. However, the halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Beit Hillel. However, we have to find a way to move forward, and Beit Hillel wins the day. Right. So just like right in democracy, right? We vote. They have their point of view. They have their point of view. They can both be right in some way, but we have to move forward. And when we move forward with Beit Hillel almost all the time. Why? Since both of these are the words of the living God, why were Beit Hillel privileged to have the halacha established in accordance with their opinion? Why did Beit Hillel win? The reason is that they were agreeable and forbearing. They were kind and patient, showing restraint when affronted. Right? They didn't get angry about the arguments. And when they taught the halacha and when they taught the Jewish law that they disagreed about, they would teach both their own statements and the statements of Beit Shammai. Right? So they're pluralistic. Right? This is the first pluralistic, statement in our Torah. Right? That say according to Beit Shammai, they believe you shouldn't do it. Right? And here's why they think. Right, and to explain their reasoning, and to acknowledge it and appreciate it, and then disagree with it. Just showing that you first listen, first seek to understand, then try to be understood. Right, but the first step is to acknowledge the diversity of opinion, and to appreciate the different opinions, and then finally, look, we have to move forward in some way. And so God says, which way we go? We go according the more open, the more pluralistic, the more respectful opinion is the way that we go. But it's tough to imagine that both are true. Right? And that's how we purport ourselves in the world. Right? And that's what we believe, right? We believe in multiple truths, right? So truth takes a back seat, right, to kindness and respect and love, right? And in the codes, right, we call them white lies, right? White lies can be used, right, sometimes in order to save someone's feelings, right? So one example of that is, according to Beit Hillel, every bride is beautiful, right? If you're asked, oh, how beautiful, was the bride beautiful? The answer is always yes. And no matter what, right? And so like today, if you go out to dinner and you're almost at the restaurant and someone says, how do I look? What's the answer? You look beautiful, right? Because there's nothing to do about it. All it will do is hurt someone's feelings, right? And so justice and mercy, right, are the core Jewish beliefs. And truth sometimes takes a back seat, right? When there's a country, when there's a fight, when there's a when you're between a rock and a hard place, and truth, either telling the truth or saving someone's feelings, the feelings take the priority, right? The respect, the diversity, the honor. So a person might think, since the Academy of Shammai declares impure that which the Academy of Hillel declares pure, right? So if Shammai says it's impure and Hillel says it's pure, then one prohibits that which the other permits. How then can I learn Torah? Right? All of the words have been given by a single shepherd, one God fashioned, one provider gave them, source of all deeds, blessed be God, has spoken them. Right? How can it be, right, that we respect both opinions, but we only go according to one? It doesn't even make sense. And so the work, the spiritual work that we have to do is this: make yourself a heart with many rooms and bring it into the world of the Academy of Shammai and the words of the Academy of Hillel, the words of who declare impure and those that declare pure, right? You can never get lost in the hate, in the argumentation, in the polar opposites, right? But rather, we have to learn how to integrate both, right? We believe in multiple truths, which is part of how we maintain our diversity, maintain our integrity, maintain our love and kindness, right? So we learned about all the distinct and beautiful colors of the Jewish experience, right? And they're all Jewish, right? God forbid, right? We should say, someone's more Jewish than the other person, right? We are all Jewish, one people with one heart. I'll stop there for a moment. Any questions about denominations or multiple truth, or just comments in our final few minutes?
Rabbi, did you get my present?
I did. Thank you. Good
You like
question.
it?
Love it. Yes, it's very beautiful. Thank you, Eliana.
Yeah, okay.
Other questions? Yes. All right, beautiful. All right, so we'll send, if we haven't already, we'll send out the text so you can review some of this material. I know the denominational history is a little bit thick, but I hope you gain some perspective, and we all move forward with kindness and respect. Yeah, Matt, you have a question?
Oh, yeah, I had a quick question. It was just about the On One Foot intro to Judaism videos, I guess I got a link to.
Okay.
So apparently my email is already registered with an account, but I don't have a password. I didn't really
Oh, okay.
That happened with me too.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll look
But
at
I reset my password. That might be what you have to do, Matt.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, I'll do that then.
I'll try resetting. Yeah, okay, that's it.
Yeah.
And I'll ask Blake about that too.
Is that what Blake sent?
Yes, yes. So yeah.
Oh, okay.
All right, friends. So good
Thank
to
you.
see you.
Thank you.
Forward to next week, and thanks for being here.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.